Anyone want to run it? And I just be Notes Monkey? If not, I'm happy to. All right, go for it.
Okay, we have our. Hold on a second. I presume we don't need the community testing day on the 13th of April, unless we're going to have another community testing day I don't know about. Release health. So we have one release blocker. Sven, I don't know if you could click through. Okay.
And we have a fix on the way for this that's landing in Envoy 1.18.2, hopefully today. So when we cut the release candidate tomorrow, it should be fixed.
Okay. It's a great status update.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty. Enough of the release help. Unless somebody else wants to say any release managers want to chime in about the release help?
Yeah, not so much the release health, but in terms of the release announcement, I think it was brought up last week, kind of the marketing style announcement we do with all of our minor releases. And we're still looking for an owner on that. So if we can somehow identify who should be writing that.
All right, we talked about that in steering. Do I remember who volunteered? Someone volunteered. Who got a volunteer? I think Craig and one other person. Craig and Zach volunteered to help.
Yes.
So
Sven remembers correctly.
Do you know, Sam, how the testing looks right now? I haven't looked this week.
I don't think we've done much better since last week. If you're talking about the docs testing.
Yeah, I know last week. So we had some stuff that was reported as fixed in January that never got reset, and then there was quite a few left open after that. So we might want to address that real quick. At least look through it. Hey, Shweta.
Good morning.
Welcome back, Shweta.
Thank you.
Okay, the next release is going to ship. I think we covered this before, actually.
Yeah.
And I guess we just talked about that was what we were just talking about, Brian, the docs testing?
Yeah, docs testing.
But we don't quite have all the test cases automated. That's what you were saying?
So that's the spreadsheet right there. There was a lot of stuff last week that was marked as being completed in January, which was before 110 was really started. So cleared that out, and there was a lot left over. I'm just catching up on it now from, I don't know, Wednesday or whenever the last time I looked at it was, but I'm not sure where that stands right now.
Okay.
So I think what Brian is saying is in the spreadsheet, a lot of things were marked done with January dates that were left over from 1.9 testing. And so if we clean those up, there's a bunch of 1 testing left that we didn't know about.
Yes, that's correct.
So we still have a backlog. And I presume we're not expecting to try and address that at this point for the release.
I don't know.
Not in terms of automating, but I think we should probably test some things, right? If not, at least manually.
Yeah, do we want to ship without P0s tested?
Not so much, no. Brian shared a link. Is that the cleared up sheet, Brian, or is?
Yeah,
Can we
that
get
links
a-
the testing sheet as it stands right now.
How many items are we talking about?
I want to say there was like 20 of them last week, but it's the what's not covered, but what's not marked as done in the automated column and what's not marked as done in the done by column. All of those still need to be tested.
Brian, are you talking about just P0s or more than P0s?
Just P0s.
And
So like
how many
looking,
do we have? Do we know?
I'm not sure, but looking at what's here right now, it looks like there's one P0. If you go up to the top, there's a filter for P0s only.
Where's that? Is that under data?
The funnel. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so we've got this one P0 right here. The line 27 is also a P0 that's not done yet. Line 38 as well.
Those are the ones
Oh,
that don't
wait,
have.
actually, nope, that one says it was done by Eric, just not started. And then, yeah, 27, 38. And then if you scroll down further.
It would be like 40, 43, 44. Those all need.
Yep.
Don't even.
I'm worried the automated tests aren't working because I tried the Jaeger task manually and it didn't work. I'm going to go through and figure out why it seems to be marked done.
Well,
So
if it's marked done in green in that column D, that means there's a test existing for it. Are you saying there isn't a test for it, Ed?
No, well, there is I'm sure there's a test for it. The question is, Jaeger being a graphical thing, I'm very curious as to how it was possibly tested. For me, it's certainly, I mean, Jaeger came up, but the data I expected to be there wasn't. So I got to go through the exercise of figuring out if the test is faulty or if I'm not following the instructions. But I opened 2 issues.
Yeah, I do recall that there are a number of tests that graphically because we don't there's something else being done.
Yeah, I foolishly took on the Kiali automation, and I started writing code to use the, REST API to test it because I can't test the GUI, and it took longer. It's taken longer than I thought. Writing these tests of these third-party tools is not trivial. But it makes me question some of these automation columns. Like, we shouldn't have automation if we're not sure that we don't trust the automation.
I mean, what's the general solution there, right? Other than like the whole point of automation is so that we don't have to manually go through everything. If we still have to go manually through everything because we don't trust automation, then it didn't help us.
Well,
right?
so I feel like the automation is great for things that are command line only. And I'm going to, hopefully in a few hours or days, I'll know why the automation is succeeding for this particular item. But in general, I would rather not have the security of an automated test if the person didn't test the appearance of the GUI, which is the problem, right? For a tracing tool, the traces have to be there. So it's not just enough that I can do all the commands like deploying Jaeger and that sort of thing.
Right. The test has to verify that it actually worked, not that it just completed.
Yeah, so Ed, I think you brought up a good point. I would say in general, our automation is accurate on the command line testing, which I haven't seen any issues. But the GUI, we need to look into, is our
It sounds like
Right.
Ed, you should sync up with Doug or somebody like that, and then
Okay.
see what's covered, and then you guys can have a discussion about it. And certainly testing GUI tools is hard, and if they don't have APIs behind them, right, to verify their own behavior, then that makes it right. You have to use other mechanisms. Shweta, you said there were 10 unassigned P0s. That's correct?
Yeah, I just checked the stats. There are 9 P0s which are unassigned, and there are 12 which are in progress. Some of them needs automation. They're working on it. But I guess we are very close to the release, so I'm hoping that they should be done by this week. I do not know the current status, though.
Okay, so we probably need to try and balance those out among the working group leads and find owners for them, right? And either get the priority assessed, or if we're not going to get automation done in time, which the release is coming up very quickly, right, that seems a little bit of a stretch. So either they're manually tested or they're deprioritized. Shweta, can you follow up with the working group leads?
Yeah, I'll do it tomorrow in the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks, Brian, for pointing that out. That's useful. We want to get back to the agenda. Seems like we have no slated docs for review, unless somebody has a last-minute bonus add-on. And then we have a roadmap presentation. Test and release.
Want me to click on that one? Wait, this is a link to the working group notes. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. You want to do it, Eric, or should I?
It doesn't matter. I guess I can. You talked about the doc stuff, so
Okay.
yeah. So most of these, well, I shouldn't say most. But most of them are probably in our yearly roadmap. They all weren't in there, and we didn't have a 1.11 spreadsheet created yet, so that's why we're sort of doing it here. We want to continue with the promotion of the features process. Brian and Shweta looking into that. We want to continue with the evaluation of features. I'm thinking that's actually probably pretty close to done at this point. I know there's a bunch of PRs out there now. Miriam is continuing with that work. One of the things that we want to try to do this release, if we can, is to rename the branches from master domain. I know Envoy's done that. I know John had made the comment that this might be a slightly bigger hassle than what we thought we were going to get for free from GitHub. But I think we can probably use the private repos to do some testing between the various repos as we move over to main. So I'm planning on doing that, and hopefully I can maybe get somebody from Google, just because if we have to mess with the pipeline stuff, we can do that. We want to make sure we continue promoting external Istio to beta. I think this was probably on the environments list as well. I know there's a couple issues there that I'm going to work on. And I believe Miriam had also said she would work on some things there. So that was all the P0s. A P2, Brian was looking at making sure we get the distro-less images promoted to beta. I know there was a couple of issues open in that space that have to be solved as well. I know we want to try to figure out how to handle the maintenance for manage.istio.io. I know Mitch is trying to not have to spend as much time doing that. And so Brian and I are going to try to figure out what we can do in terms of maintenance. There's a couple of items that we still want to do going forward, but we didn't have anybody step up to do those for 1.11. in terms of the test infra generation. So this is basically related to the automation of the branch cutting, which is work we started a couple of releases ago, and just trying to finish that up. As things change every release, we have to make some updates. So we find some things, and I know Sam and Brian had made a list of things that were done during the last branch cut to work on with automation. And then finally, Sam was going to work on some release notes tooling. So we want to do some things related to release notes. I know Sam was talking earlier this morning, and there's some issues with validation and running the tooling, and some things end up going missing because area names are specified in the release notes that we're not capturing, so we end up skipping over those. So I know there's some stuff in that space we want to do as well. I think that was pretty much what we had on our list. Any comments on those?
Looks good. I'm excited to see, external Istio and even distro list to beta.
I actually get a quick question on that. What work is involved there? Mostly adding additional test cases?
In terms of the external Istio, yes, we need to do some. Yeah, we need to do some test cases there. I think Lynn had actually got most of the docs done, as well as testing in the docs. So now it's just making sure we add some stuff to the integration test framework and some tests.
Okay, and who's doing that work?
I had said I would do some of it, and I didn't put Stephen up here, but I think I had heard that Stephen was also stepping up to do some of that work. I haven't been involved with the meetings, but I think Stephen and Greg Hansen and maybe another person have been talking about that.
Yeah, it'll probably either be me or Frank Budinsky.
So when we talk about the feature promotion process, obviously you spend a lot of time in iterating on the process itself. Is there more automation work that's expected, and what are we expecting to do there?
Yep, one of the big things that TOC asked for, which we've laid the groundwork for, but we haven't really done anything with, is a way to keep features moving forward. So this feature has sat in alpha for 3 years. We should decide whether we want to get rid of it or whether we want to actually promote it or that sort of thing. So that's really what this focuses on.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah, this looks
Easier to good here.
Yeah, and you guys probably know what Brian has done on future promotion. Now it's a PR process instead of an issue, which is really nice, and everything is like aggregated together in a file.
Yeah, it looks really good.
Thanks.
Have people that have gone through the process had feedback on it? We should make sure we're get that feedback as part of this, just to keep iterating. But I think it's been a huge improvement.
Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, should we go back to the agenda, which apparently is just me now?
Take it away, Sven.
So on the first one, I'm kind of slightly wondering if we should punt it for a week, but I wanted to maybe just give a quick rundown. We were discussing some of the APIs for VM support, and John Howard was pushing back a little bit on our desire to make those beta APIs, not because of quality, but because of the pain that it is to go through to change APIs. So that seems broken to me. So I wanted to raise it here that we shouldn't be preventing the promotion of features of the APIs, even though like the feature is better, right? The feature is ready, just because of our infrastructure for API management. So he had a long list that I meant to copy, did not find time for. He could probably describe it better than I could anyway, so maybe we can revisit next week. But the main question I had is kind of who being which working group is responsible for improving the situation, and sort of who can help take this on.
What is the exact situation here? Is that the strictness for alpha is too much, or what's the
so improving the ability for us to make API changes as we move our APIs from alpha to beta to stable.
So to be from Ivano's point of view, we obviously have the ability to name that to call the APIs whatever we want. I mean, it's not really a problem of not being able to have the APIs move to beta. The only problem is how the string type URL in Kubernetes looks like, and that's a Kubernetes problem. The infrastructure in Kubernetes, and even if they fix it today, it will be 6 months to a year or 2 years until all Kubernetes versions support it. And so the only problem is basically that cosmetic string at the beginning of the API.
Yeah, I'm. So for what it's worth, I put together the original transformation to get us that Go client stuff and the Kubernetes API. I don't quite understand why we don't just want to move to a Kubernetes-like API for everything and make that like what we're starting from for all this other stuff. I think that would certainly simplify things. I mean, it would probably require a lot of work because we'd have to remove all of that wrapper library that's within Istio to convert the native Istio types to a Kubernetes type that we can then register with the Go clients and all that stuff for the library, because the Istio itself doesn't use any of those Go clients. Those are mostly for third-party folks. But in doing that and using a more, I guess, Kubernetes-centric approach, right, with Kubernetes schema and those kinds of things, have stuff built in for doing API conversion, all this stuff. I mean, it's an extra webhook to get the conversion library in there, but that's pretty much a singleton. But I think, adopting approach like that and trying to move to it would certainly give us the ability at least to support multiple versions of a given resource.
And to be clear, we did try this and it didn't work very well because the webhook and infrastructure and Kubernetes versions we support did not play well very nicely with.
Yeah, but that's been in Kubernetes for a long time now.
Okay, I think we need some, right? One, we need historical version assessment, right? Like, is the most recent Kubernetes version that the oldest Kubernetes version that we currently support in a supported release got the feature that we care about or will have in a release that we intend to make this change, right? What version of Kubernetes is the min version of Kubernetes we expect to support in 1.11? 1.18?
Well, officially support or not officially support, because there is also the, vendors may support older versions, and if we force everyone to move to V1, then we break that.
Right.
What I was hoping to get is somebody to take this on as a project and come back with a proposal, rather than doing the design in TOC.
Yeah, sure. But just for the record, it's been stable in Kubernetes since 1.16.
Okay. So Rob, do you have a good sense of exactly what we need here? And could you write something up saying, like, here's the proposal, switch this, and we get these benefits?
I mean, I could write something up. It's really just a bunch of grunt work to go and convert all this stuff up to regular types. I don't know what work would be involved to convert the existing proto stuff that we have into Kubernetes types resources, because right now we kind of do it backwards, right? We start with
Rob, it will not change anything. I mean, we did this exercise once. I mean, it's not really a problem of doing. I mean, we have a proof of concept of whatever it was called. We tried to do it once, and actually we did it from alpha to beta. We need to look exactly what we did. Have John also present, because he has a list of other things besides the webhooks that didn't work well.
Yeah, I think the first thing is you got to move to a real Kubernetes type and away from the proto, right? So that would be a prerequisite for that, so that you get using the Kubernetes serialization mechanism in place and using Kubernetes schema type instead of the stuff that's sort of wrapped up in, right? Because Istio has its own infrastructure for doing all of this stuff. So the first step would be moving off of that and onto like a native Kubernetes thing. And once you're on that, then you have the ability to start looking at, okay, now I can version an API. Here's what the converter looks like, if anything. And then begin to make, I guess more usable changes to the API, other than just saying we're going from V1 alpha to V1 beta, and it just works because we didn't change the structure.
Right. Yeah, we want to support actually changing the structure and auto converting like Kubernetes is designed to support. Right.
Yeah.
We don't want
I think Jason did some of this though.
Yes, with
Right.
existing,
That's the
without
point.
changing the everything. Yes.
Yes. So I think that's what Costin is pointing at, and it was still a struggle.
Well, yeah, certainly writing a converter takes work, and it would certainly require some effort to integrate the conversion webhook into that.
Right.
But
And corner cases, there are all kind of corner cases we found. I mean, users, they had all kind of problems, and
I guess I don't understand what you're saying, because generally when you get done with this, you want to have a controller that's reading a specific version, and the converter is taking care of that stuff for you. If you want to go a step further and have like an internal type, right, that sort of wraps everything together, and is sort of like the in between, you can go that route. But we're using it in Maestro, the conversion webhook and all this stuff, to convert between values.yaml and our version of what the Istio operator resource is without any problems.
Okay. So I guess there's obviously a bunch of people who've played with this stuff in the past, so they should all get together. Which working group owns this now?
That was my main question.
Is it in environments?
I don't see what it has to do with environments. It's an API TOC.
Yeah, the last time that this was dealt with, the user experience working group owned it. We have not been doing much with the API since then.
Yeah, and the work that I did with Client Go, or Go Client, whatever it's called, was originally done under the old API working group, which I believe is no more.
But would it be possible to sidestep the problem and decouple ourselves from the semantics of Kubernetes? Because Istio, it's also a bit bigger than Kubernetes. It's not necessarily tied to just Kubernetes.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a bunk argument, because all you're doing is using that Kubernetes type, which just has a metadata field and everything's in spec. So it's not like you're jumping off a bridge here and can't support anything else. It's just saying if we adopt that as our standard type, it works really well in Kubernetes, which is, I'm guessing, is where a majority of people are using Istio in the first place. And it doesn't preclude you from using those same types and using Proto and all this other stuff external to Kubernetes.
That's still debated. I mean, it's not clear that, because we had some experience and it didn't work very well. But the point is, we do not need to have the API structure tied to that particular type. I mean, we can use V1 in Kubernetes and have our own internal structure, defined however we need. I mean, we definitely need to have full backward compatibility when we make changes. We intentionally don't want to break users. And
so Costin, we want to have backwards compatibility within a version, and we want to have translation between versions, but it's okay to make breaking changes between versions. Between like alpha to beta, as long as we can convert, right? So that's the whole point. And today we don't have that. So I think like the status quo is not good enough because we're getting pushback on making simple string changes, right? So we clearly need to do something better. I think the question is, who is willing to own this problem? All right, so it's fine to complain about it, but I want an owner that is going to go help us solve it.
So certainly historically, Jason has been the owner, right? Because he's done most of the work in this area. I don't think he's on the call right now, but so.
I would say networking plans are to just move to the Kubernetes APIs altogether, so it doesn't necessarily touch networking too much.
Well, there's still going to be some.
Yeah, those networking APIs are going to be around for a long time. Like, it'll be great that users are primarily using the Kubernetes APIs, but we have publicly said that it's going to be years before we're turning off the existing ones.
But also said that we are not going to make major changes. We're going to keep them as stable as possible. So basically, they're V1 more or less.
Right, but we should still promote them, Costin, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Rob, it sounds like you at least have formed opinions on this subject. We know John is probably going to write something up, Sven, based on.
I don't know if I can convince him to, but I'll try.
Okay, and Jason is the one who's worked on this problem.
And Costin clearly has lots of thoughts on it.
Mostly that maybe we should not solve this problem for a while. I mean, maybe it's not a problem that needs to be addressed.
I brought it up here, Costin, because it is a problem that needs addressing.
Yeah, so. I'm happy to get involved and do some requirements gathering, at least internally at Google, because I know it's been a concern here. So I'm happy to be involved in that too.
All right, thanks, Justin.
Yeah.
Okay, Justin and Rob and whoever else wants to get involved, can you guys go off and at least frame the problem a little bit better for us?
Right, we should still pick a working group, right? We need to define a working group home for this. It sounds like it was the UX working group. Even if that maybe isn't quite right, maybe that's what we should stick with.
That works for me.
That sounds good to me.
Oh, so Louis, just to make it clear, right? Typically, we designate working group because the decisions can be made within it. Looks like regardless of whichever working group we choose, the decisions will have to come to the TOC.
Yes.
At least for the moment, yes. Right, because it's possibly a big decision. But I'd still also like to know, right, which working group will own kind of API machinery questions.
Okay.
For small to medium decisions as well.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
John.
Johnson.
Is John in there?
Yeah, okay.
And yeah, so if people feel like they have, things to say about the subject, then they should attend to that. So UX working group folks, could you just make it clear when it's on the agenda?
Sounds good.
I will even try to attend. When are UX working group meetings again?
So we're meeting on Tuesdays normally at 11 a.m. Pacific. I don't think we probably would have papers ready to present tomorrow. So I would expect the earliest to be a week from tomorrow. Does that sound reasonable?
I think we were going to skip tomorrow because everyone was going to be at Service Mesh Con.
Thank you for reminding me, Ed.
I realize Service Mesh Con ends a couple hours before, but we're all going to take a nap, I think.
Can you watch the? Can you just start a couple hours late and attend Service Mesh Con at a delay? I'm not getting up at 2 a.m. for my own talk.
For such a complicated problem, for a few weeks of research and looking at what we did wrong last time may be worth it.
Oh God.
Yeah, I think this is going to need some recurring discussion.
That sounds good.
I do have to get up for Service Mesh Con.
Well, you have the
So
best
happy.
time slot.
It's only 11. Well, my talk is at 11 p.m. in Hawaii, so not too bad.
Yeah,
Your session
it's
is
gonna
the
be.
last one, so.
Yeah, I'm
Anyway.
up at 3:45 in the morning. It's great. Okay. Shall we move on to the next topic?
Move on to my other topic.
I have one more question on this topic before. Then, if you would prioritize your goals here, is moving to V1 presumably the primary goal, but is making backward incompatible changes maybe a P2 or P1, or would it be okay if we have a solution that just moves to V1 with what we have with backward compatible and maybe deprecating fields, but without semantic renaming? Or do we want all at once all generic solutions that does translation, conversions, automatic everything?
Yeah, I think the requirement there would be to support making backward incompatible changes.
But again, there is a time versus feature versus. I mean, would it be short term in 1 or 2 releases to move to V1, which I think seems like a primary goal, and then make backward compatible maybe in 2.0 or maybe have
Well, it's not really an issue until you have to make a change that's backward incompatible, and right now you don't have the ability to make any changes that are incompatible, right? So this would be, in my opinion, laying the foundation to have proper API evolution.
Do we have any backward incompatible changes that we are planning to make in the next 2 or 3 releases? I mean, can we have a solution that is just moving to V1? And that's, I'm trying to figure out how much we want to break things and how much instability we're going to get towards the benefit of hypothetically making backward incompatible.
Yeah, I guess if I were to plan it out on the fly here, like I said, the first thing would be to use Kubernetes type resources. So structured with, object metadata, type metadata, and spec instead, and remove the wrapper library that's part of Istio, so that the Kubernetes types become first level types. That would pretty much obviate most of the client Go and API project, because we would start with API types and use those for a generation. Obviously, we need to make sure that all that stuff is backward compatible with Protos, but and this would be only for the types that are used with Kubernetes controllers, right?
This is
Obviously, other types. I'm sorry.
This is a massive change that will destabilize pretty much everything. I mean, it's a huge change. That's why I'm trying to figure out if we can break down the requirements in something that and avoid this for a while, because it's. I mean, you should not underestimate how much pain we're going to incur in both code, users, bugs, and all kinds of other things.
Yeah, I'm not underestimating anything, right? Because we're swapping out that entire mechanism and moving to Kubernetes first for our controller pattern, which I think makes things easier for everybody, right? We don't no longer have to maintain this weird translator that translates from Proto to PRD to client Go libraries and proper Kubernetes API types, right? We start with Kubernetes API types and everything else flows out of it. We've got the controller gen tools that manage all this stuff for us, so we can offload all of the extra tooling that we have in our builds. And I'm not saying that it's going to be a small change at all, so don't get me wrong, but I think that's what needs to be done in order to get to the point where we can start doing API management.
That's one approach. Also, don't forget, we also have other protocols like the former MCP. I mean, Istio used to send protos and that. I mean, it's both design and implementation are massive if we need to achieve all those goals at once. That's why I'm trying to clarify the strict requirements.
So Sven wrote down, I guess, what we would consider the external requirements, right? Leaving aside the technical ones. And so I don't want to get into a proto versus not proto as the primary authoritative discussion here. And
No.
like, I'm gonna no, Custom, I'm going to let the folks who have spent most of the time doing this come back with a recommendation and have a discussion about it, because the TOT isn't going to have a strong opinion about that unless there's clear evidence, right, that there's going to be disruption one way or the other. I take your point about it being very expensive. I understand. And so if the solution is do what Rob suggested, but it's going to take 3 releases, then we have to talk about it.
Yeah, so I think what I was asking for is like a clear definition of what the problem even is, right? Like, why can't we meet these goals today? What are we failing to do today? And then, proposals and the pros and cons associated with them, right? Like, we don't need to debate this right here.
Right. If there is more than one concrete proposal coming back, then we certainly can debate it after we've reviewed it, right?
Yeah.
Other P0s here is, can't disrupt the whole development process, right? Can't destabilize the release, right? All the usual engineering things, right? And so, it's either, if it's big bang, it's cheap and quick, right? Or it can be done incrementally and we can prove that we can do so safely, right? Because we can't stall all the other teams, right, while this is happening, right? That is not allowed. Just like we couldn't stall users.
Yeah, I think if we were planning this out, we would go and put everything in side by side and then switch over in Istio the controller logic and all that to use the native Kubernetes types. And if that's working, right, then at that point we can start stripping out all of the other infrastructure that supports our own sort of Kubernetes wrappers.
Okay.
Let's have an alternative plan as well, because I don't believe this is the only solution, or it's the best solution, or it's viable, really.
Yeah, so like there's a list of people who all have expressed interest in being, or have had interest expressed on their behalf. If more than one proposed solution comes out, then we'll talk about it. Should probably move along at this point.
Yeah. So my other topic, so let me, this was, yeah, an interesting discussion. So I have been thinking about how to frame what Istio does, and so we're not going to get too much into detail, I think, today, because we only have 15 minutes or less. But I'd like everyone to, on TOC to take a look at this and provide feedback. I think some people have already. There's, a way to look at what Istio does as really just being networking done at the application layer instead of at the, other layers. And actually, there's a lot of, existing discussion actually from folks about that. And basically, I tried to write up what would happen if we leaned more heavily into that, and really, rather than talking so much about services and service mesh, started talking about applications and application networking. So basically, there's a list of proposals in here for what we would do. So one is that we already have the concept of an application in Istio. We just call it canonical service. But really what it means is actually the name of the application endpoint in the application networking model. That's actually like what its semantic meaning is. It's just we actually thought about calling it application. We just, when we were working on the design for it, we didn't have this framing of the problem. And so we leaned against application because of that, because people were like, everything's services. But it actually better if we did that. So that's one. And then another is that today we have this sort of disjointed identity model where we have this indirection between the applications and the service accounts, and there's sort of this mapping you have to do. Kubernetes makes it pretty easy to do because it gives everything a default one in the namespace. So like if all you care about is namespace identity, you're fine. But it's providing this extra level of indirection that kind of is not necessary. And so the proposal would be to just stick that basically application name, canonical service name in the certificates and allow that to be used for our authorization policies. There's a pretty long discussion in here of what that would lead to, but there's some nice benefits that, like, what you end up monitoring and what your authorization policies look like then become symmetric, right? Everything becomes kind of lined up on the same things, and you don't have to do this mapping of, oh, okay, wait, I have calls from this client, it's running as a service account, et cetera, et cetera. So any thoughts before I don't know the right way to go through this. I could go through each point. We could talk about each one.
If I can say, it will be pretty awesome if we do that. I mean, in terms of, it will simplify a lot of things and improve scale and a lot of other things in give us a secure naming and a lot of implementation details. So.
Yeah, this is actually pretty fundamental, right? That it's kind of hard to understate how big a change and impact that would be on understanding the conceptual model for what's happening and the interaction between security, policy, and, well, pretty much anything identity related.
Yeah.
And interoperability.
This is a very fundamental change in how Istio works, although I'm proposing it is an addition, not a replacement, so that, right?
Too specific.
Yeah.
Well, because you can have multiple SPIFFE identities.
You cannot have, according to the spec, as far as I know, there is only one SPIFFE identity, but you can have additional SUN. So you can have DNS plus. But that's perfect because for interoperability, I mean, if we express canonical service name is a service name, it's not a SPIFFE identity. So it's basically perfect matching to have both identity as SPIFFE plus the SUNs which allow interoperability with other clients that are not SPIFFE aware.
Yeah, I mean,
right,
so I think there's a longer question of do you then add other SANs in there, but that's tied up in the whole secure naming fiasco.
My point was SPIFFE spec.
SPIFFE, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because when we were sort of designing SPIFFE, there was actually a discussion about this exact situation, and I think at the time I was pushing for service accounts because that's what we had. We didn't really have this other model, and SPIFFE intentionally is more general, right? And there was a lot of discussion of like application identity when we were talking about this and building the SPIFFE model. So it is unfortunate if you can only have one SPIFFE identity in the cert. That makes this harder. But yeah,
or it makes it better. I mean, you look at it as a feature because it allows us to put the identity in SNI, which is in the SUN, which is perfect match with SNI routing we are doing, which is also based on DNS name, host name. So it's a perfect fit for interoperability. So there are a lot of benefits if we implement it as a DNS SUN.
Yeah, there are benefits, yes.
Or even as a common name, right?
Common name is also possible, but again, if we think about SNI routing, which is we are using it extensively, it will tie things together very nicely.
So I have a question. What are your thoughts on pushing some of these configuration to Kubernetes, such as like the service name and service identity?
So what do you mean? Can you give me an example?
Like for instance, in your proposal, you talk about instead of using service account, which Kubernetes provides to us today, we use that in authorization policy, right? So you are proposing, okay, we could using application names instead of service account. I was just wondering regarding your proposal, some of these application name and identity, if it's coming naturally from Kubernetes, I think it would be pretty transparent for our user to adopt. Instead of they would have to mentally do a mapping between service account to the application name, right? Because they could still, like if I deploy book info today, I could create service account for each of my book info services, which is probably recommended by user running services in production. So, I mean, if Kubernetes have that native concept of application name and application identity, it's just so much natural for people to leverage from a service mesh perspective.
Yes, I did not. I did not propose tackling that. Trying to push this down into Kubernetes. So Kubernetes does have this whole application concept that they've been working on, and there's a good but not perfect fit between what we want to do and what they want to do. But yeah, I have on my list to reach out to, I don't even know if that's a whole working group, but so if it's a working group, the leads of that working group, and discuss this. Yeah. So maybe.
Yeah, okay. It just occurs to me that would save user from doing the mappings, to think through, from the Kubernetes concept to our concept.
Right.
And honestly, just from my perspective, I always have trouble to pronounce canonical service. So I'm never a good fan of that name. It's just so hard to pronounce, a word that I have to look up in dictionary to find out what it means.
Yeah, I think that's partly why I want to rename it, is because it's a very hard name for kind of something that I want to be fundamental to how we operate. And like we had this huge internal to Google discussion also about this, and like ideally we would have been able to call this thing a service, but Kubernetes has the name service already for something different, and it's like, so we need another name. And so we just added canonical, and I don't know that was necessarily the best thing to do. We maybe should have just, at the time, sucked it up and chose an application, and I'm kind of saying, hey, let's just do that.
By the way, speaking of Kubernetes, there is also a discussion about in the gateway API, Kubernetes gateway, about how ownership and how those names can be authorized and mapped to different workloads and delegated and basically the whole model for who is allowed to claim a particular name.
Yeah.
Yes. We very successfully influenced Kubernetes to adopt the same name as Istio. And now who gets to own the shortcut, for example?
No. I was talking about the example.com, the delegation part that we're just.
Oh, yeah. That's.
Because
I was talking about the fact.
Yeah, I know that's a different
short name.
Speaking of API revisioning, no, but again, if you claim your application name is example.com, and then you have gateways that forward you to example.com and so forth, then we run into all kind of problems. Who can claim that it's example.com? If it's something .namespace, we can validate and so forth. But otherwise, it's an issue about ownership.
Yes, there's definitely segmentation between. We need guidance about what names people are allowed to use for which things, because we don't want to end up with accidental collisions between external and internal serving.
So real quick, I think I only went through the first 2 points here. So the last two are slightly less, I think, crazy. So number 3 is that basically we should just make it simpler to target configuration and applications. So right now you can do it, but you just use the same label selector, right? That was basically, you say, label canonical service equals whatever in your policy. I'd like to make that more first class. So basically you can just say, as part of your configuration, application equals whatever. This was actually always part of the plan for canonical service. So it's just saying, hey, let's finally do it. When we first did this, we're like, hey, later we can just make it easy to target configuration. Then we never did that. So hey, we should do it.
But
Oh, good.
Sven, I think if we use Sun, it's already covered because there is a field for Sun matching, so we don't have to do anything.
I'm talking about in our workload selector on configuration.
Oh, workload selector. Yeah, okay. I thought in policy. Yeah, policy.
Okay.
Like, yeah, like binding auth policy to a workload, right? That's the example.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you were not presenting that portion, so I wasn't sure if you were referring to that. Yeah, so I agree with you. I mean, our workload selector is actually very confusing. I was just looking at our documents, like in the gateway resource today, we use a selector, right? In the Envoy filter, we're using workload selector, and in our authorization and authentication, which includes the peer authentication and also the user authentication, we use like label selector. It's really hard for a user to judge, which one they should be used. It's almost impossible to remember, and unless they go to our documentation to find out exactly which one.
Yeah, because we can't rename things between versions, so it's hard for us.
Yeah. Yeah, back to the problem you raised earlier.
Yes, we should try to unify all those, but yeah, I think that the main proposal here is just to add a field that is like application, and then you can just select it, or not even select it, you just enter it, and then the config applies to that. And then the last thing is less well thought out, but like just basically we should finish multi-network. I think it's not really tied as much to this idea, but basically, if you think about like an application layer network, that's inherently multi-network. So just let's lean into that more and say, multi-network is kind of a big part of what Istio does and kind of a big part of the value, and describe it in terms of these application layer overlays, etc. But we're out of time, so please read the doc and comment, and we'll figure out what if we actually want to take on some of these. But I first wanted to get feedback on it in general before starting to spec out, okay, how we would actually do it.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. Did you look at the existing recommendations for Kubernetes application labels?
Yes, I've looked at them a couple times. I probably should look at them again.
Are they not applicable here?
So they are and they aren't. So the main problem is they're optional, and so we have this model of everything is a canonical service, and there's this like every endpoint is part of a canonical service always. If you don't label it, we have heuristics that figure it out, and I think that's the part that's missing from the Kubernetes one, and that's what I want to talk about.
Okay.
But then, yeah, maybe the answer is we just use their label, but we still figure that out.
Yeah, I think Rob, to your point, I think a lot of people in Kubernetes land, regardless whether they use Istio or not, would like to be able to rely on those labels existing. Like lots of other infrastructure providers, it would be helpful to them. But Kubernetes doesn't require them.
No, but if we're going to be suggesting something, why not jump on the bandwagon, right? And say, if you want it to work right, we're going to use these, or
no. So we can definitely adopt the labels as the standard. We still have to require that they are specified.
Yeah, I mean, what we do is we have a controller that injects them if not there, right? And so I think that would be the main proposal to talk to them about. And the question is, can we do it with our existing label, or do we need a new label that, like what we did, right? We invented a new label and we just copy from there, so that's present. But yeah, that's a whole discussion to have. But yeah, the doc's open for comment. Please drop comments in there.
Yeah. Side note: I wish Kubernetes documented some of these better. Like they keep adding standardized labels, and it's really hard to find in the doc what the automated labels are. It keeps coming up in discussions about the networking gateway APIs for the automated namespace labels on resources and things like that. Okay, yeah. I think we're over time.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good week.
You too.